My name is Clara, and I am 31 years old. I didn't shed a single tear when my mother-in-law tore up the $8,000 invoice for the handcrafted macarons and artisan pastries I had meticulously prepared for my sister-in-law's 300-person influencer brand launch, and threw the torn pieces right into my face. I didn't flinch when she looked down her nose at me and said, "You don't invoice family. You should be thanking us for letting you play around with your little kitchen hobby." In that moment, staring at the shredded paper on the polished floor, I supposedly had two choices. I could either watch the boutique bakery I had built from nothing bleed out and face inevitable bankruptcy, or I could scream and beg for the money I had rightfully earned. I did neither. Instead, I quietly slipped a legally binding, wedding-to-commercial lien, a definitive record of corporate theft, straight into the bleeding heart of my sister-in-law's pending $150,000 small business loan approval dossier. Before I show you exactly how I systematically dismantled her fabricated career and watched her paper castle crumble, subscribe to the channel. This isn't just a story, it's a blueprint for taking your power back. There is a specific kind of silence in Seattle at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's a heavy, damp quiet, broken only by the rhythmic hum of my industrial convection ovens and the steady drumming of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my bakery. While the rest of the city slept, my world was measured in exact grams, temperature gradients, and relentless discipline. Creating authentic French macarons is not a hobby. It is an unforgiving science. A variance of 2 degrees in the oven, or a few extra folds in the meringue, is the difference between a pristine, melt-in-your-mouth delicacy and a fractured, unusable disaster. I had spent the last 5 years of my life mastering the science, trading sleep and social hours for the right to sign my name on the lease of a premium commercial kitchen space. I was the executive chef, the procurement manager, and the sole owner. I kept my family at a polite, carefully calibrated distance because the brutal reality of hospitality leaves no room for emotional liabilities. Unfortunately, liabilities have a way of walking right through the front door. The bell above the entrance chimed, shattering my morning rhythm. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Tiffany, my sister-in-law, swept into my pristine, stainless steel sanctuary. She didn't just enter a room, she occupied it, bringing with her an overwhelming cloud of designer perfume that aggressively clashed with the delicate aroma of Madagascar vanilla bean I had been carefully extracting all morning. Tiffany had never held a real job. Her existence was entirely subsidized, first by her parents and now by a husband who preferred funding her endless string of startups to dealing with her tantrums. Her latest venture was a heavily branded, aggressively marketed cosmetics line. She leaned over my marble counter, her oversized designer handbag carelessly knocking over a stack of perfectly folded linen napkins. Without bothering to ask how my business was doing, she launched into a breathless monologue about her upcoming brand launch. She needed catering. Not just a few trays. She demanded a sprawling, opulent dessert bar for 300 VIP guests, influencers, and local press. She wanted gold leaf detailing, custom-colored macarons to match her brand's Pantone shade, and towers of artisan pastries. I stood there, wiping my hands on my apron, watching the way her eyes darted around my shop. She didn't see a grueling business built on blood, sweat, and razor-thin profit margins. She saw a convenient, free resource. She framed the demand with that practiced, passive-aggressive sweetness, calling it an amazing exposure opportunity for my little project. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain that exposure does not pay commercial rent, nor does it cover the exorbitant cost of imported almond flour. Instead, I simply walked over to the register, pulled out a standard commercial catering agreement from the drawer, and laid it flat on the counter. I filled in the itemized projected costs, drew an X next to the signature line, and pushed the pen toward her. I told her that my production schedule is tight, but I would legally commit to delivering the flawless 300-person service she required, provided we formalized the order. Tiffany looked at the paper as if it were a joke. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh, shaking her head at my supposed formality. She didn't glance at the itemized breakdown. She didn't look at the cancellation clauses or the payment terms. She just picked up the pen and, with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, scrawled a looping, dramatic signature at the bottom of the page. Tiffany signed that paper with a smile on her face. She was so blinded by her own arrogance, so utterly convinced that everything in the world belonged to her by right, that she couldn't see the reality of what had just happened. As I watched the ink dry on the page, I knew exactly what she had done. She thought she was just ordering a few strawberry tarts. She was far too arrogant to realize that she had just pulled the pin on a grenade and handed the live explosive directly to me. The venue was a sprawling, industrial chic loft in downtown Seattle, transformed for the evening into a monument to Tiffany's vanity. Exposed brick walls were draped in blush pink silk, and dozens of harsh, blinding ring lights were strategically positioned around the room to ensure every angle was optimized for social media. In the center of it all stood my work. I had designed the dessert installation as a cascading architectural piece. Tiered acrylic stands held hundreds of macarons, their delicate, crisp shells dyed perfectly to match the exact Pantone shade of Tiffany's new lip gloss line. Each one was hand-painted with a stroke of edible 24-karat gold leaf, resting flawlessly beside miniature dark chocolate tarts and precisely layered opera cakes. It was a visual masterpiece, and the guests treated it exactly as Tiffany had intended, as a prop. For 4 hours, my sous chef and I stood at the perimeter in our crisp, impeccably pressed white chef coats. We operated with the silent, militaristic efficiency that premium catering demands. As soon as a platter was disturbed by a manicured hand reaching for a pastry, we seamlessly swapped it for a fresh, mathematically arranged replacement. We watched micro-influencers pick up my intricate creations, hold them next to their faces for a photograph, and then casually abandon them on cocktail tables after taking a single, performative bite. I didn't let it bother me. In the hospitality business, you detach yourself from the consumption of your art. My focus was purely on the execution and the numbers. The ingredients alone for an event of this scale, the imported Valrhona chocolate, the specialized edible gold, the Madagascar vanilla beans, and the sheer volume of premium almond flour, had cost me thousands of dollars up front. Add in the 18 hours of continuous labor, the logistics of transport, and the overtime I was paying my staff, the final invoice sat right at $8,000. For a boutique operation like mine, $8,000 was not a buffer, it was an artery. That specific sum was already allocated to cover my commercial lease for the month, along with my primary vendor payments. Without it, the delicate financial ecosystem of my bakery would immediately begin to suffocate. As the clock crept past midnight, the blinding ring lights were finally switched off. The crowd thinned down to Tiffany's inner circle. She was lounging on a velvet sofa in the VIP section, her high heels kicked off, scrolling through the night's tagged photos on her phone with a self-satisfied smirk. It was time to close the ledger. I walked across the sticky floor, holding a slim, black leather presentation folio. Inside rested the final itemized invoice, printed on heavy stock, textured ivory paper, the kind that conveyed uncompromising professionalism. I approached the sofa, waiting a beat for Tiffany to acknowledge my presence. Before I could even extend the folio toward her, the heavy scent of juniper berries and overwhelmingly floral perfume hit me. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, materialized from the shadows of the lounge area. She wore a tailored pantsuit that screamed old money, her wrists heavy with platinum bracelets that clinked loudly with every exaggerated movement. She intercepted the black leather folio right out of my hands. "What is this, Clara?" Beatrice asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it possessed that specific, vibrating frequency of condescension designed to carry across a room. She flipped the folio open. Her eyes, framed by expensive surgical lifts, darted down to the bolded total at the bottom of the page. A tight, patronizing smile slowly stretched across her face, not reaching her eyes. $8,000? She let out a sharp, incredulous breath, looking around at the remaining guests as if inviting them in on a joke I didn't understand. She looked back at me, her gaze dropping to my flour-dusted shoes before rising back to my face. Then, with agonizing deliberation, Beatrice pinched the top of the heavy ivory paper with her long, acrylic nails. She pulled it from the leather binding and tore it squarely down the middle. The sound of the thick paper ripping seemed to echo in the cavernous loft. She stacked the two halves together and tore them again, letting the pieces flutter out of her hands and onto the floor, landing among the discarded cocktail napkins and scuff marks. "You are a part of this family, Clara," Beatrice said, her tone dripping with a toxic, honeyed sweetness. She reached out and patted my cheek, two firm, demeaning taps. "This was your gift to your sister-in-law. You should be thanking us, really. Thanks to Tiffany's little party, your little baking hobby just got thousands of dollars in free advertising." I stood perfectly still. I didn't swat her hand away. I didn't look at Tiffany, who was now hiding a smirk behind her champagne flute, utterly silent, letting her mother do the dirty work she had undoubtedly planned all along. My calves were aching from 18 hours of standing, and the sheer audacity of the theft was a physical weight pressing against my chest. They actually believed they could simply erase my labor, my materials, and my livelihood because they viewed my profession as domestic servitude rather than a corporate enterprise. When my mother-in-law dropped the torn pieces of the invoice onto the floor and turned back to sip her champagne, I didn't feel the urge to say a single word. Because in corporate America, justice isn't delivered by screaming, it is delivered on letterhead. I didn't utter a single syllable as the torn fragments of my livelihood settled onto the sticky, champagne-stained floorboards. Beatrice stood there, her chin tilted upward in that distinct posture of anticipated victory, waiting for the inevitable explosion. She wanted the hysterical daughter-in-law. She wanted a scene she could gossip about at her country club luncheons, a dramatic display of emotion that would validate her belief that I was nothing more than an unstable, working-class interloper. I denied her that satisfaction. With a slow, deliberate movement, I crouched down and picked up the two largest halves of the ruined invoice. I folded them neatly, slid them into the pocket of my chef's coat, and signaled my sous chef with a subtle nod. We packed our remaining equipment in absolute silence. The clattering of heavy stainless steel hotel pans and the harsh zip of insulated transport bags were the only sounds we contributed to the lingering hum of the party. I walked out of that loft without looking back, leaving Tiffany and Beatrice to their hollow, glittering kingdom. The drive back to the bakery was shrouded in the dense, gray mist typical of a Seattle night. The city was asleep, but my mind was a churning, hyper-efficient machine, processing variables and calculating trajectories. When I unlocked the back door of my kitchen, the familiar scent of vanilla extract and sanitized steel grounded me. I didn't go home. I didn't seek the comfort of my bed. I brewed a double espresso, tied my apron back on, and sat down at the small metal desk in my office. It was time to build a paper trail. In the sterile glow of my laptop screen, I began the meticulous process of digital archaeology. Emotion is a liability in business, but documentation is armor. I pulled up the high-resolution, time-stamped photographs my team had taken of the dessert installation before a single guest had arrived. I downloaded the email threads where Tiffany had explicitly confirmed the guest count and the required aesthetics. And most importantly, I scanned the original, pristine copy of the catering agreement. I had learned early on never to bring original, wedding contracts to an event site. The paper Beatrice had so triumphantly torn to shreds was merely a high-quality copy. The original, bearing Tiffany's looping, dramatic signature and her explicit legal commitment, was safely locked in my fireproof filing cabinet. I arranged these files into a single, unassailable PDF dossier. Through family dinners and forced holiday gatherings, I had gathered enough intelligence to know exactly how Tiffany's financial ecosystem operated. She had recently registered her cosmetics line as an LLC, and she was in the final, agonizing stages of securing a $150,000 small business loan from a prominent regional bank. In the world of commercial lending, an applicant's corporate credit profile must be immaculate. A single red flag, a whisper of financial instability, or a pending dispute is enough to freeze an underwriter's pen in midair. At 8:30 a.m. the next morning, I stood in the echoing, marble-floored lobby of the King County Courthouse. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of floor wax and bureaucratic fatigue. I bypassed the lines of distressed couples and traffic violators, walking straight to the Commercial Records Division. I handed a thick manila envelope over the reinforced glass counter to a bored, spectacled clerk. Inside the envelope was a formal application for a commercial lien, specifically a mechanic's lien adapted for unpaid commercial services rendered to an LLC. It was a precise legal instrument designed to attach a debt directly to the assets and credit profile of a business. It didn't require an immediate trial, a lawyer, or a shouting match. It only required absolute proof of an unfulfilled contract, which I provided in overwhelming detail. I watched in silence as the clerk scanned the documents. His eyes flicked from the signed contract to the photographic evidence, verifying the undeniable reality of the debt. He didn't ask about family dynamics. He didn't care about Beatrice's platinum bracelets or Tiffany's follower count. He simply picked up a heavy, date-adjusting rubber stamp, inked it on a black pad, and brought it down on the top page of my filing with a loud, satisfying thud. The debt was now a matter of public record. It was legally binding, accruing interest by the day, and immediately visible to any financial institution running a background check on Tiffany's LLC. If you are watching this and you've ever had to work twice as hard just to get half the respect, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about what happens when you stop being polite and start keeping receipts. Stay with me. Later that evening, sitting on my living room sofa, I watched Tiffany post a heavily filtered photo on Instagram. She was posing in front of my dessert spread, holding a glass of champagne, the caption reading, "Building an empire takes vision and a tribe of amazing women. #girlboss, #CEO. She looked so victorious, so untouchable in her curated digital fantasy. She had absolutely no idea that while she was busy harvesting likes, the red seal of a commercial lien had just dropped onto her credit report, silently beginning the countdown to demolish her paper castle. I waited until Sunday morning, the one day my bakery was closed to the public, to bring my husband into the architecture of my retaliation. He found me sitting at our dining room table, the harsh blue light of my laptop screen illuminating the dark oak surface. The house was entirely silent, save for the low, steady hum of the refrigerator. I didn't greet him with tears or a hysterical recounting of his mother's cruelty. That is precisely what Beatrice would have expected. She thrived on emotional chaos, banking on the arrogant assumption that a fractured marriage and a crying daughter-in-law would eventually force my submission. She thought I would beg him to intervene. Instead, I simply turned the laptop screen toward him. It displayed a sterile, meticulously formatted Excel spreadsheet. Row 14 detailed the exact import cost of the Madagascar vanilla. Row 27 accounted for the overtime wages paid to my sous chef. Row 42 bolded the total outstanding balance of $8,000. Your sister commissioned a commercial service, and your mother destroyed the invoice in front of an audience, I said, my voice as flat and even as if I were reading a weather report. That $8,000 is not a hypothetical family favor. It is the exact sum required to cover my commercial lease and premium vendor payments for the month of November. To protect my LLC from imminent insolvency, I have placed a commercial lien on Tiffany's new business entity. My husband is a pragmatic man, a trait he thankfully cultivated to survive his mother's theatrics. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer hollow apologies for his family's toxic entitlement, nor did he try to gaslight me into keeping the peace. He simply leaned over my shoulder, tracing the red deficit line on the screen with his eyes, absorbing the undeniable, objective math of the situation. Is the filing airtight? Was all he asked, his voice quiet in the still room. Stamped, filed, and actively attached to her corporate tax ID, I replied. He gave a single, slow nod, poured himself a cup of black coffee, and walked into the living room. The matter was settled. There would be no internal sabotage, no emotional leaks. The perimeter was secure. With my home front locked down, I simply had to wait for the heavy machinery of the financial system to turn its gears. The absolute silence from my end of the family group chat must have been deafening for them. They were starved for my outrage. When it didn't arrive, they clumsily attempted to manufacture it. On Tuesday afternoon, while I was temper testing a massive batch of dark couverture chocolate, my phone vibrated aggressively against the stainless steel prep counter. I wiped my hands on a fresh towel and tapped the screen. It was a text from Beatrice. Still pouting about your little piece of paper, Clara? Tiffany's launch was a triumph. Don't ruin it by being greedy. Family is about give and take. 2 hours later, another chime pierced the quiet focus of my kitchen. This one was from Tiffany, featuring a heavily filtered selfie of her holding up fabric swatches in what looked like an expensive, empty office space. Looking at drapes for the new HQ. Thanks again for the cute snacks last week. Catch up soon. They were testing the perimeter, tossing pebbles at my window to see if I would crack. The urge to reply, to unleash a torrent of righteous anger, to shatter their smugness, and tell them exactly what kind of legal ruin was hurtling toward them, was a brief, fleeting shadow in my mind. But anger is free, and I was in the business of collecting debts. I picked up the phone and took a high-resolution screenshot of each message. I exported them as PDFs and routed them directly to my secure cloud drive. I created a new folder labeled Exhibit B, Acknowledgement of Services Rendered, and dropped the files inside. Every mocking word they typed wasn't an insult. It was admissible evidence. It was digital proof that the event had occurred, my labor was utilized, and the debt was being intentionally ignored. I locked my screen and went back to tempering my chocolate. Exactly 7 days after the launch party, the calendar flipped to the date of Tiffany's loan finalization. I knew the precise schedule because she had spent the last 3 months loudly broadcasting every trivial detail of her CEO journey on her social media platforms. Her appointment with the senior commercial loan officer at the regional bank was set for 10 a.m. As the morning rush at the bakery finally subsided, I stood by the espresso machine, polishing the chrome steam wand with a microfiber cloth. I glanced at the analog clock above the register. It was 9:45 a.m. In my mind's eye, I could see it perfectly. I could picture Tiffany strutting through the heavy, revolving glass doors of the bank, wearing a tailored, oversized power suit she had undoubtedly charged to a maxed-out personal credit card. I could hear the rhythmic, arrogant clicking of her designer heels on the polished marble floor and smell that overpowering, synthetic juniper perfume as she approached the executive suites. She was about to sink into one of those plush, genuine leather chairs, fully expecting to smile and charm her way into a $150,000 corporate lifeline. She had absolutely no idea that waiting for her, buried right at the top of her freshly pulled credit profile, the mountain of my $8,000 unpaid invoice was standing like a brick wall, ready to shatter her fragile illusion of success. At 10:15 a.m., the sterile, heavily air-conditioned office of the senior commercial loan officer became the burial ground for Tiffany's fabricated empire. I wasn't there to witness the exact moment the underwriter's monitor flashed red, but the mechanics of the financial system are predictably brutal. I knew precisely how it played out. The bank officer, sitting behind a polished mahogany desk, would have confidently typed Tiffany's shiny new corporate tax ID into his terminal, fully expecting to greenlight a routine $150,000 disbursement. Instead, he hit a reinforced concrete wall. A commercial mechanic's lien, formally logged and legally undisputed, flagged the LLC for services rendered and maliciously unpaid. In the realm of corporate lending, an active lien isn't a minor hurdle or a conversation starter. It is an immediate, non-negotiable termination of proceedings. It is the financial equivalent of a quarantine. By 2 p.m., the fallout arrived at my front door. The heavy brass bell above my bakery entrance didn't just chime. It violently clattered as the glass door was shoved open with enough force to rattle the delicate pastry display cases. I was standing behind the front counter, meticulously aligning a fresh batch of pistachio eclairs onto a chilled granite slab. I didn't flinch. I slowly set down my stainless steel tongs and looked up. Tiffany and Beatrice stood in the center of my shop, entirely stripped of the suffocating, calculated superiority they had worn so comfortably just a week prior. The grand illusion was shattered. Tiffany's oversized power suit suddenly looked like a child's costume on her shrinking frame. Her face was flushed, a blotchy, uneven red creeping up her neck, and her breathing was shallow and erratic. Beatrice, usually a flawless statue of cold, old-money composure, had a visible tremor in her hands. Her knuckles were bone-white as she white-knuckled the strap of her designer purse. "How could you do this?" Tiffany's voice cracked, a shrill, hysterical pitch that bounced sharply off my white subway tile walls. She marched toward the counter, slamming a manicured hand flat against the glass display. They denied it. The bank froze everything. They treated me like some kind of common criminal. You ruined your sister-in-law's entire future over a petty grudge, Beatrice hissed, stepping up beside her daughter. She attempted to summon her usual aristocratic venom, but it was severely diluted by raw panic. You will remove that ridiculous filing immediately, Clara.
Today.
Before I call our attorneys and have you buried in defamation suits. I remained perfectly still on my side of the counter. The physical barrier of the marble between us felt absolute. I reached down, untied the knot of my flour-dusted apron, and retied it with slow, deliberate precision. The frantic, chaotic energy radiating from them crashed against my absolute silence and simply dissolved. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my morality or justify my actions. I simply reached beneath the register, pulled out a crisp manila folder, and slid it across the polished marble until it stopped exactly at the edge, hovering inches from Beatrice's trembling fingers. Inside were the duplicated, watermarked copies of the original signed contract, the time-stamped photographic evidence of the catering spread, and the officially stamped commercial lien from the King County Courthouse. There will be no attorneys, Beatrice, because there is no defamation, I said. My voice dropped to a low, even register, forcing them to physically lean in just to hear me. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Tiffany. Defamation implies a falsehood. What you did last week was not a familial misunderstanding. You didn't ask for a family discount. You orchestrated an $8,000 theft, and you arrogantly assumed you could use my livelihood to underwrite your vanity. Tiffany opened her mouth to speak, but her throat simply worked silently. She looked down at the heavy legal documents, her eyes wide, finally recognizing the immovable, crushing reality of the trap she had eagerly signed her way into. The lien stays exactly where it is, I continued, tapping a single, flour-dusted finger against the marble. Unless, of course, you want the freeze on your credit profile lifted today. If you ever want that bank, or any bank, to look at your LLC again, you're going to pay the debt. You're going to pay it right now, in full, including the standard commercial late fee. I turned my sleek, black iPad register around to face them. The screen glowed with a stark white light, displaying a newly generated invoice. I had already keyed in the original $8,000 plus a $400 penalty, as explicitly outlined in the breach of contract clause she hadn't bothered to read. The total sat boldly at $8,400. This register, I said softly, pointing to the credit card terminal.
Right now.
Or you can leave my shop and watch your brand die before it even manufactures a single tube of lip gloss. The choice is entirely yours. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the stench of their defeat. Beatrice looked at Tiffany, the fight completely draining from her surgically lifted features. She knew they were cornered. Corporate America didn't care about their country club status, their family hierarchy, or their curated Instagram feeds. The system only cared about the ledger. With trembling fingers, Tiffany unclasped her purse. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. She pulled out a sleek, heavy corporate card, likely tied to the last remaining line of personal credit her husband had given her, and slowly pushed it into the chip reader of my terminal. The machine hummed for 3 agonizing seconds. Then, a sharp, synthetic beat pierced the quiet sanctuary of my bakery. I looked down at the glowing screen. The word, approved, flashed in bright green lettering. As the machine began to whir, spitting out the crisp thermal paper of the receipt, I knew it was not merely a debt collected. It was the official, documented surrender of an enemy and the definitive proof of a war I had. The thermal paper printing the receipt was the final punctuation mark on a sentence they never thought I had the vocabulary to write. I tore the slip from the machine, its jagged edge perfectly crisp, and handed it across the marble counter. Tiffany took it with fingers that lacked their usual rehearsed, manicured elegance. She didn't look at the numbers. She just crushed the thin paper into the palm of her hand and turned toward the glass door. Beatrice followed closely behind her, the heavy platinum bracelets on her wrists entirely silent for the first time since I had met her. The heavy brass bell above the door chimed their departure, and just like that, the suffocating, frantic energy they had dragged into my sanctuary evaporated. The delicate, grounding aroma of toasted pistachios and vanilla bean reclaimed the space. I didn't celebrate. I didn't let out a breath of relief, pour myself a glass of champagne, or call my husband to gloat. I simply picked up my stainless steel tongs, turned back to the chilled granite slab, and resumed meticulously aligning the pistachio eclairs. Business, after all, does not pause for personal victories. But the machinery of corporate finance is a beautiful, unforgiving thing. Paying the debt did not erase the history of the transaction. When you settle a commercial lien under extreme duress, the financial system notes the friction. The regional bank's underwriters saw the flagged LLC, saw the late payment penalty enforced by a vendor, and accurately calculated the risk of a founder who alienated her own supply chain before manufacturing a single product. 3 days later, the bank formally declined the $150,000 line of credit. I didn't need an insider to tell me this. The evidence was broadcast loudly through the sudden, deafening silence on Tiffany's social media platforms. The daily barrage of aesthetic office tours, fabric swatch polls, and aggressively curated CEO morning routines vanished overnight. Her brand's sleek, minimalist landing page, which had promised a revolutionary cosmetics experience, quietly transitioned into a static white screen bearing 3 bleak words, "Site under construction." It remained that way indefinitely. Without the bank's capital, her heavily mortgaged illusion had no foundation to stand on. She had thrown a spectacular, gold leaf-covered launch party for a ship that was already resting at the bottom of the ocean. The shift within the family dynamic was far more subtle, playing out entirely in the negative space between words. The following month, at the mandatory Sunday dinner at Beatrice's sprawling suburban estate, the air was thick with a new, unspoken protocol. When I walked into the grand dining room, Beatrice didn't offer her usual backhanded compliment about my clothing, nor did she refer to my livelihood as a little kitchen project. During the meal, the clinking of sterling silver against fine-boned china was the loudest sound in the room. Tiffany sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, her eyes fixed firmly on her plate, completely devoid of her usual commanding, theatrical energy. When the conversation momentarily stalled, Beatrice looked in my direction. Her eyes, framed by those expensive surgical lifts, met mine for a fraction of a second before quickly darting away. She reached for her wine glass, her knuckles slightly pale against the crystal stem. In that fleeting micro-expression, I saw it. Fear. It wasn't a fear of physical retaliation, but a deep, structural terror of a woman she now knew she could not control, manipulate, or bankrupt. The familial hierarchy had been violently restructured, not with screaming matches or tearful drama, but with the cold, irrefutable power of commercial law. As for the $8,400, it didn't just cover my lease. It became the capital for my expansion. By the end of the quarter, a delivery team hauled a brand new, state-of-the-art French convection oven into my kitchen. It was a massive, beautiful monolith of brushed stainless steel and digital precision, capable of holding a temperature variance to within half a degree. Running my hand along its pristine, cool surface before the morning bake, I felt a profound sense of ownership. Every perfectly risen macaron, every golden, flaky croissant that emerged from that oven was a silent, daily testament to the line I had drawn in the sand. There is a comforting lie we are told in polite society, that if you put your head down, work relentlessly, and turn the other cheek, people will eventually recognize your value and grant you the respect you deserve. But the reality of the world is far more transactional. You cannot wait for people to hand you respect as if it were a gift. Sometimes, you have to teach them how to respect you, using their own weapons, operating within their own systems, and extracting the cost down to the very last penny. If this reminded you of a battle you had to win in silence, share this video, subscribe, and drop a comment below. I'll see you in the next story.